Hi there, Thak from Thak Ironworks. I am very excited today. We are doing the final piece for my Greek hoplite suit, which is the dory or spear. And to do that, I am doing a forged steel head, and on the butt spike, we are doing it out of poured bronze. But I am not someone who does bronze casting, so I have brought in a guest, so I introduce you to Patrick Kenny. And before you ask, no, not the same Patrick from SpongeBob, not Patrick the Starfish. I asked,
no, different guy.
Totally different guy. Anyway, I'm just going to hand it off to Patrick now, and he's going to talk about what his process is, what he's going to be doing. So I'm just going to leave. See ya.
See you, Thak. Hey, folks. Yeah, Thak asked me to come in and do a bit of bronze casting. As a going concern in my work, I do typically bronze age swords. So that's a lot of casting in molds, of course, made out of soapstone. Stone being a typical material that they would have used back in the day, 2,500, 3,000 years ago. They also did molds out of sand, and I'm sure a lot of you know this. Molds out of sand, cast in sand or clay. And I recently read as well, there were molds made themselves of bronze to cast bronze things. That was news to me. I hadn't known that. But as far as my process goes, I built myself a foundry, a forge foundry, to heat up a crucible like this, clay graphite crucible, into which I put, of course, and many of you will know this, the components that make up bronze. Bronze is an alloy of copper, for which I use basically recycled copper wire, electrical wire, and tin, which Thak asked me earlier this morning, where do I get my tin? And I told him, I live in Toronto, and I told him that most people don't realize there's a tin mine in Toronto called the Value Village Tin Mine. Which you may be scratching your head. But if you go to Value Village and you go in the kitchen section quite often, if you go through the metalware, so bowls and dishes and cups and saucers and plates, you'll find pewter. And pewter is an alloy of tin. And if you're a little bit discerning and you get to recognize the brands, you can get pewter items that are 95, 96, even 97% tin. With the remainder there being a little bit of copper typically, maybe a little bit of lead, maybe a little bit of antimony, something like that. And so for, $40 or $50, I come up with an armful of tin that does me for a couple of years in terms of swords and the other things I make. How did I get into this is a question a lot of people ask me. Since I was little, I've always had an interest in metalwork and ancient history and that sort of thing. So I took a lot of courses, did a lot of research, collected tools over the years, knowing one day I would have a shop to work in. And typically I did a lot of blacksmithing, that sort of thing, and I still do. But a couple of years ago I was going through a website, the website of the British Museum actually, looking at Bronze Age artifacts, and there was a sword in there, what they call a leaf-shaped or a York Park style sword. And I don't know, something about it clicked. It had been dug up in Ireland, and I just knew then that I had to make one. And that sort of really diverted my career a little bit into the bronze casting. Custom-made molds out of soapstone, as I mentioned earlier. And then when Thak approached me about making the butt end of a dory, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I guess the technical name for this is a soroder, which means something like lizard stabber, because again, as you're holding it, it goes on the ground end, and so you can stab lizards, I guess. Anyways, the dodgy bit, or the tricky bit, or the challenging bit of this project was that if you imagine just a flat sword, you've got two halves of the mold and you pour the bronze in the top. Simple enough, right? For this project with Thak, it has to fit on the end of the handle for the spear, right? The butt end of the handle. So there's a cavity inside, and of course you could drill that out, I suppose, if you had the right tools. But in antiquity, they wouldn't have done that necessarily. So I had to figure out a way to create that cavity in the mold and be able to pour around it. And you'll see a little bit of that later this morning as I put the mold together and then pour the bronze. So this is the mold we're going to use. I carved it. This is soapstone. I think it's from South America. Not that I sought out South American soapstone, but that's what I could get my hands on, and carved out, well, drew out the design based on what Thak provided to me. Carved it out with, not historically accurate, but just a rotary tool, like a Dremel, with carbide burrs. Refined it a little bit from casting to casting, just to make sure it had the shape right. It was round where it should be round and square where it should be square. And I'm just going to reach over here and put my glasses on while I line up the two halves, because you want everything to line up properly, of course.
Much stuff, and then compromise that you can't use your sink to clean up, I guess, the trick with
That.
There was my job, the doctor gave me, and they're all worried about COVID is my dog, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And yeah, like just they were friendly at the start, and then I said I'd keep going, and then like, yeah.
Now, soapstone is a very forgiving material in the sense that as you heat it up and cool it down, it doesn't flex very much. It doesn't expand and contract very much. However, over time, and you can imagine the liquid bronze is extremely hot, it will crack. And in fact, I've got a crack starting on, you probably can't see it on the camera, but down on the one side here. And that's okay. That's why I've got this backing, these wood plates on the back to keep the pieces together. I've used a high temperature silicone as an adhesive to keep them all in one piece, hopefully. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago, you have to hold the cone, the sort of the insert there that's going to create the cavity for the handle. You could carve it out of stone, but to some degree they often break, so I thought maybe cheaper and faster to use something like just molding plaster, which seems to work pretty good, maybe one-time use, but they are cheap, so no great loss there. But again, I still need to make sure everything is lined up properly, or you end up with weird little bubbles and apertures in the final piece. Got a little flashlight here. I just want to check down the throat of this, make sure everything's still lined up okay. So yeah, that's kind of fiddly work, and you know, historically there was probably an easier way to do this, or a more sensible way to do this, but this is what I came up with for this project. This way, part of what that allows me to do is take a stick like this and just check down along the sides to make sure I've got clearance all the way around for the bronze to flow in and around. Now that's a little bit tight on that side, so I will adjust just a little bit. Careful not to drop the stick into the mold, or I have to just take it all apart again. And I have done that, so that's the voice of experience. You tend not to think of this, but if it's not in there tight, the plaster cone will actually float on top of the bronze and up and out of the mold, which you, of course, don't want. But I think that's ready to go. Now, we're going to wait a little bit longer for the copper to finish melting, and then we're going to add the tin. All right, so the copper in there, I don't know if you can see it, it's all melted in the crucible. It's a nice little glowy funnel of metal. I'm going to add the tin now. You add the tin later because tin melts, as you probably know, at a much, much lower temperature than copper. And if you added it at the start, it would all be evaporated, and then you'd just be pouring copper later on. So I'm going to add it now, and it just melts almost instantly. And it's gone. It's mixed into the melt now. You can melt it all down just in seconds. And now we'll give it another 5 or 10 minutes just to get melted together, or to alloy together. And then we're going to do the pour. Charcoal powder to stop the bronze from oxidizing. Liquid bronze. Here it comes.
Dun, dun, dun.
Down here, protect the feet. Crap, I did the same thing again. Fast. Everything here is super hot, so thick gloves are still important.
thing of beauty. Look at that. All right, so I'm going to now forge this steel spearhead, and for that I'm using 5160 spring steel. I've got a piece here that's 3 inches by 5 inches, and then I had a bunch of these that somebody had given me. They were actually turned for furniture legs, so it's a hollow taper, which I've had kicking around in my pile for 20-25 years, and it's like, it's time to use it. So I'm going to use this to make the socket here. So what I'm going to do is split this, put some filler in, and forge weld this whole thing together. You'll see what I mean when we get into it. So let's go to the bandsaw first. So I have taken my socket, which I split, and then I put some 5/16 filler rod in there to give me a backer, and then forked it over, excuse my language, over the piece of 5160 here, and then just MIG'd some tacks to hold everything in place. Now we're going to bring this up to welding temperature and forge weld this on. Bit of a tricky weld, and then I have to use my cone shape here in this mandrel and work into that. This is going to be awkward and hot, so let's see how it goes. All right, so I've just brought it up to an orange sheet here, and I'm fluxing. Excuse my language again. Because of the length of this, I'm going to have to do it in several welds, so I'm going to start at the tip and try to get that done first. All right, I have finished grinding this thing. I've got it to the shape that I want, and I actually forged out the socket to enlarge that a little bit, and it ended up with some hammer texture, which is in keeping with the rest of the finish on all our pieces here. In any event, I'm ready for heat treating. Should point out that if we were historically accurate, this would be made out of iron and not heat treated at all. But we're doing this out of spring steel, so I'm going to harden and temper it to give it a better wearability. So let us begin with that process. Anticlimactic. I typically quench with the blade vertical, but it wasn't deep enough in this quench tank, so I might have a little bit of warping on the blade, but I'm not too concerned. Ooh, hot oil in my boot. Yeah, it happened again, Eric. It happened again. All right, so the blade is hard now, but I need to temper it. For that, I think I'll use the torch. Trying to do it old school in the forge here might be a little problematic. This is an awkward shape, so I'll grab the torch and do that. All right, so we've got our two pieces done. They're sitting there on the anvil there. I think I want to do some bronze band. I'll talk about that in a second. Anyway, I got a piece of wood here. Hickory was the wood that I could get that has the flexibility and everything that I'm looking for. So this is a piece of hickory that is 7 feet long, 1.25 inches in diameter. So now what we need to do is taper the ends and start fitting our two pieces on there. But first, I want to show you something. So I think I need to, I don't know, bring these together aesthetically a little bit. And what I'd like to do, I've decided, is to make some decorative bronze bands to put onto the steel head, just to tie it together. So this is not historically accurate. It may have happened, I don't know. But anyway, it's what I'm going to do, so let's get into that. So I want to do a decorative band, but I don't want to spend a lot of time doing really fine detail work. So this is a really quick way to add some visual 3D coolness to something without spending a lot of time. You'll see what I mean as it all comes together. All right, so I've got my two bands. I bent over the pieces and then folded them back and then hammered it down to crease that, much like origami where you're creasing paper, you want it to hold that rigid edge. So I've now hammered that over. In doing that, I've worked hard on the whole thing quite a bit, and now I have to open up that part, which is deceptively tricky to try to get a blade in there and open that up again. So I'm going to anneal it, soften everything up, and that'll make it a little bit easier, and then you'll see where I take it from there. That's a fiddly, awkward process. So I brought both those folds over and hammered that edge to get that crease so that you get a really nice pronounced line when you bring it back. So then I have to open it up, which is the really awkward part, and then start collapsing it down. Basically taking a channel and collapsing it down, you come up with this cross section here, which leaves this nice attractive little double banding when you bring that around. So this whole process has worked hard on it quite a bit. I'll anneal it one more time and then make it into a ring. All right, so I've roughed these two guys out there. They need some fine fitting yet, and then they'll be positioned when I actually position it onto the spear itself, and I'll do some antiquing on there and do my typical stuff, but that adds a nice little accent to it. So there we have our two pieces. I've got my chunk of wood, which I'm now gonna spend a couple hours and mount all this stuff up. I don't think you guys need to see that. So I'm going to do my goodbye for now. So that's it, all the pieces are made. One last video coming up of me putting this stuff on. So we're gonna start from me buck naked, and I'm gonna put on every piece and show you how it functions and talk a little bit about it, about weight and different specs and stuff like that. So that will be a very different video, but pulling it all together. And finally, you guys have been asking to see me wearing this stuff. You'll be able to see all the pieces on, everything in context. So that is coming very soon. I'm very excited. I will see you in that video. Stick around. Back out. See ya!